All right, good morning and welcome to the Texas State Board of Social Worker Examiners Town Hall meeting relating to the Behavioral Health Executive Council's Quadrennial Rule Review. For those of you who have not heard our speech about this, welcome and thank you for joining us. The uh, state law requires every state agency, to examine its set of rules, all of its rules, at once every 4 years. And the Behavioral Health Executive Council is undergoing that process right now for all of its professions, including social work. And so throughout the spring, our staff has been going through all of the rules and identifying ones that may have problems that conflict with statutory guidelines and need updating, or perhaps operations or practice have changed, and so our rules need updating. Or perhaps there are topics that folks like you have brought to us that we think need investigating or looking at further. And so this town hall is an effort to share time with you to get feedback about those findings. Hopefully, you all, with the notice of this town hall, also saw the findings document and could look through that. But we also, in addition to those findings, we want to hear from you about what sort of rule changes that you think need to happen and get looked at. While the statutory process, this quadrennial rule review, is meant to identify just the rules that need to be changed to align with statute, we want to take this opportunity to build a list of priorities, a list of topics that you want us to look at and to have the board really consider. So today, we're at this town hall. We are excited to offer that opportunity to hear from you. What we will be doing is essentially recognizing anyone who wants to speak and give us some input. We will be available to answer questions if you have any about the rules that we have identified in the initial findings document. I will share my screen briefly and show you where that information is. So if you go to our main website, bhec.texas.gov, and you click over here on the State Board of Social Worker Examiners tab, you will see a menu that includes meeting dates, agendas, and minutes. And underneath that, you will have found the posting for this town hall announcement, as well as this initial staff findings. And if you click on that, it will bring up a PDF that discusses all of our initial findings. So if you haven't had a chance to look at that yet, I highly suggest you do so. It will show you what rules we have identified as potentially needing changes. Now, I did want to note that this process, the whole process, what we've done so far and this town hall, are meant to identify what rules need changes going forward. We have not made any changes yet. We are not proposing any changes yet. This is really an information gathering stage. Once we have identified the rules that we believe need changed, they will go through the normal rulemaking process that you are all familiar with. They will be voted on by the boards. They will be posted in the Texas Register. There will be 30 days for public comment before any rules can be adopted. And so just wanted to assure everyone that you have not missed any changes through this process. This is the step to identify them. We will be proposing changes after this. So with that, I would invite those of you online, if you have a comment that you would like to share, if you have a question, if you have an idea for a rule, really anything, I'll call you in the order in which you raise your hand. If you would use the raised hand function at the bottom of your screen, and I'll be happy to recognize you. We will generally follow the normal meeting guidelines that we use, which is 3 minutes for public comment. But given that this is an informal meeting, we have some flexibility, and so I'll just ask you to generally keep your comments to around 3 minutes. But we are looking forward to the give and take. So first up, thank you for being the brave individual to go first. Oh no, I spoke too soon.
Nope,
There
she's
you are.
back.
Miss Lutz. If I could have you unmute and introduce yourself, and then please share your comments.
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. My name is Angie Lutz. I'm a LCSW and a council approved supervisor. I actually submitted several written comments for you late last night, so I won't go over all of those in these 3 minutes, but just wanted to emphasize a few items with the code of conduct. I like how it is. I don't really want anything changed on that. I know that was one of the topics. Also, limitations to relationships with clients or former clients. There was a mention in there about sexual misconduct. I do like that social work is different from some of the other licensing boards that once a client's always a client, and there's no amount of time that can pass that would make that okay. I don't think that that would be in line with NASW Code of Ethics. So would like that to stay the same as it is. When considering hours for clinical experience for clinical licensure, I recommend that the board keep in mind that it should be the type of work being done, not the setting it is done in, because there are several social workers who are in non-clinical settings doing clinical work and vice versa. And lastly, I appreciate that you all are doing this and cleaning up all of the rules and all of the time that you're taking to do this. I would recommend for the next quadrennial review in 2028 that in addition to what you are doing now, that you consider maybe having a committee or task force of licensees who are not on the board to also go through all of the rules and make some recommendations in advance. Thank you so much for your time.
Excellent. Thank you very much for joining us and for these comments. And I appreciate the both input on the rules and the idea for next time, thinking ahead. I love it. Is there anyone else? We are a small group today, but small but mighty, as they say. Excellent. Mariah Boone, if you would unmute yourself and introduce yourself and share your comment.
Hello, I'm Mariah Boone. I'm the chair of the Texas Field Educators Consortium. And I would just also like to sort of reiterate what Ms. Lutz said about the code of conduct. I do feel like there's been a lot of movement to try to standardize rules across professions, but the professions are not the same. And social work has its own, its own core values, its own, standards, and our code of conduct should be our code of conduct. I wouldn't want to see changes that that were made merely to standardize across professions. And I agree that we really need to, particularly on that one point about sexual misconduct, it is a big part of social work that, your client is always your client. It would be considered extremely unethical to put a time limit on that in our professional opinions, I think. And I also agree that I think we need to be very careful about the clinical hours under supervision, that is true that there's a variety of practice settings in which those clinical hours may occur. And so I'd ask the board to please pay some attention to that. as well as not making changes to our code of conduct to try to bring it in line with other licensed professions. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. And while others are joining us and thinking about raising their hand, I will, just to respond, I do want to assure everyone listening that, for one thing, all of these comments that you give us will be shared with the board. In addition, many of the rules that you saw on our initial finding, particularly there at the very end, the list of these topics, including the code of conduct and the parameters around sexual misconduct, are very much presented as ideas that we're recommending the board discuss. There are no specific proposals or changes recommended, but just that they ought to be discussed and considered and make sure that the standards are what the boards want. And so certainly very welcome to get that feedback that you like the rules as they are, that you do not want them changed. And that will certainly go to the board for that consideration. I'll also mention that certainly there have been rules where it has been standardized across the professions regulated by the Executive Council. But we are certainly committed through this rule review process to ask the question whether rules need to be standardized. But there's no emphasis on standardizing for the sake of standardizing. And so certainly where there are differences in the profession, we are committed to honoring those differences. Well, are there any other folks in the audience at the moment that have a thought that they would like to share? Or
Robert, I do believe there's a public person coming up. Yeah, I don't know if they've come into the room yet or not.
good to know. Thank you. So yeah, we do have a room present, and if they join us, we'll let them speak as well. I did want to offer, let me share my screen again for those. The commenter mentioned providing written comments, and I want you to all be able to do likewise should you want to. Again, on our website, on our main website, if you go to the homepage, bhectexas.texas.gov, in the menu on the right, you'll see the proposed rule changes and the rulemaking process. And if you click on that, this is the webpage that will have all of our proposed rules and information about rules that have been adopted. And in addition, if you scroll down right now, there is a big header about the quadrennial rule review. And in that, you'll see this bold link that you are invited to share a public comment on our written form. And if you click on that, it will go to an online form that you may share your ideas of what rules need changing, and you may share multiple comments. It is not limited to one. This form will be available until September 1st, and so certainly feel free over the next month to share your ideas in written form as well.
I don't want to muddy the waters, but do you want to share the August 2nd proposed rules with them too on that same page
Oh, certainly.
while we're there?
While we're here, and again, please raise your hand at any moment if you'd like to give input or if you have a question. On that same web page, you scroll a little further, you'll see the proposed rule changes that are currently open for public comment. And below each of the council and boards, you will see the rule that is being proposed, where you may click on and find the text for the proposed change, as well as a similar link for the public comment form, where you may offer public comment on the changes. And below that, you'll see a summary of the proposed change so that you will generally have an idea whether you're interested to click on the proposed rule to see the changes. And I believe there is one currently, excuse my fast scrolling, but way at the bottom is the one rule that is currently proposed related to the social worker examiners is 781.302. Most of this is clarification, but certainly if you are interested, I recommend you look at this proposed rule and submit a public comment if you have any. Ms. Lutz.
Is it okay to ask a question about that proposal?
Absolutely.
Okay, I would like clarification on the LMSW doing clinical work, that section. It previously, the part that was marked out said, LMSWs can provide clinical social work in an employment setting under a clinical supervision plan or under contract when under a clinical supervision plan. That part that is stricken through right there.
Mhm.
And so the wording at the bottom of that paragraph, I'm wondering if, because it looks like different wording, it looks like LMSWs can do clinical work either under employment or under contract, as long as they are under employment supervision or under a supervision plan, not requiring a supervision plan, a formal supervision plan if an LMSW is under contract. So I want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly.
Yes, and that is the original sentence, as you see there, that is struck out, was the phrasing meant that some of the discussion of clinical supervision plan looked like it was relating to being under contract, but to more the proposal is to clarify and keep the language more in line with what the rules already say in terms of the pathways to getting clinical supervision. Sarah, would you mind speaking a little more eloquently to this than I can?
So currently, a master social worker may provide clinical services only under the auspices of an agency that has responsibility for the well-being of the client. So they can be employed by the agency or they can be under contract by the agency. But the important thing is that the agency has some oversight for the well-being of the client. And as you know, the clinical services of the master social worker must be supervised. They do not necessarily need to be counting hours toward their qualification for clinical social work, but they do have to be supervised, and that's explained in 404A2. And they can be supervised, their clinical work can be supervised by other licensed professionals. But if they wish to count their hours toward their qualification as a clinical social worker, they must be under a clinical supervision plan and must be supervised by a licensed clinical social worker with supervisor status, which is specified in 781.404A3. I hope that's helpful.
That does clarify. So whether they are under employment or under contract with an agency, they can provide clinical social work indefinitely without ever pursuing an LCSW independent licensure.
That's correct.
Thank you for clarifying that.
And just to be super clear, a master social worker may never open their own practice to provide clinical services.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you for that question. And we always like to be able to clarify our rule proposals. I'm going to hold here for just one moment. So Ms. Felderhoff, you are up next, but hold for one moment. We do have someone joining us in person in the audience. And I just wanted to offer, if you wanted to make a comment, you're very welcome to come forward and share with us, but you're also welcome to just observe. Now is a perfect time. You are up next. But if you would, if you'll come, obviously it's just a few of us in the room, but if you'll come to the microphone, that way everyone online can hear you. Sure.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here.
So, I guess I'll go ahead and ask a personal question. This is not why I came here, but I did want to ask a personal question. My name is April Phillips. I'm a clinical social worker for since 2003, and I did do the supervision program where I should be able to, supervise. But how often do you have to do that? Does it expire over a number of years, or do you have to re-up? That's my first question.
So I'm understanding you to ask the 40-hour supervisor training that you are required to take to qualify to get supervisor status. Do you have
Yes,
to
ma'am.
retake that?
Yes, I did that back in, I think, 2011, and I never used it, but I didn't know, does it expire, or what does it take to, like, do I have to re-up? Do I still have that status? If you take it once, is that sufficient?
If you applied for the supervisor status and were awarded that supervisor status,
I
it
was.
stays in effect for
Mhm.
as long as you continue to renew it. I'm going to look quickly at the continuing education rules
Okay,
to remind myself what is needed for a supervisor to renew.
and
So
so
in
if you let it,
781,
just real quick, I'm sorry, if you let it lapse, then do you have to start all over?
yes, if for some reason you did not renew the supervisor status, you just
Mhm.
renewed your license and later you're
Mhm.
in a situation where you'd like to have the supervisor.
Mm-hmm.
The 40-hour course itself does not expire, but you might have to resubmit that certificate. If staff doesn't have the certificate and you don't have it, then you might have to retake the course in order to show that you've taken it.
Okay.
And just for the renewal purposes, in 781.501, B as in boy, item 1 says that a licensee with supervisory status must complete 6 hours of continuing education in supervision, and that's every renewal period. So that's the renewal to keep up to date with the supervision trends, practices, that kind of thing.
Got it. Okay. So,
If and a caveat, if for some reason a licensee, if their supervisor status is revoked due to a probated suspension or revocation, and they regain their license and want their supervisor status back, in that instance, after their disciplinary action is imposed, they would need to retake that 40-hour course in order to regain the supervisor status.
got it.
Okay.
Yeah. I just let mine lapse. Okay, that was my first question. But the reason I came here is because I'm really worried about the state, basically the mental health crisis that we're having in Texas with lack of access to quality mental health care, especially since the continuous coverage provision that they initiated during the COVID times has expired last March. And also because Texas was one of the 10 states that chose to not expand Medicaid. So now we just have a whole bunch of people. I think the figure said something like 2 million people now in Texas who don't have health insurance. I have a feeling that's probably an understatement. I guess I guess I would like to know, are we doing anything to address this crisis? Also, we're 50th, the absolute worst in mental health care access, and we are number one for suicides. So that's just worrying me a whole lot. My organization is called Professionals, and our goal is to basically increase access to quality and culturally competent mental health care. And we have a campaign to recruit private practitioners to participate and offer any number of counseling sessions that they have available that they might be willing to share. Some people say I can only do 2, some people say I can do 4. So we're recruiting providers for that purpose. And we're also working on a sliding scale provider mental health, a sliding scale provider reimbursement program that reimburses providers at $60. We know it's not much, but it's basically what Cigna pays. Yeah, these social workers and LPCs, and with little to no red tape. So I wanted to share that with whoever is listening, whoever providers who might be listening. Once again, our agency name is Professionals. My contact email is professionals@gmail.com. That's the word professionals, replace the P with an F, fro as in fro. We're looking for also providers, a variety of diverse providers and Spanish-speaking providers to also join our forces to either donate some hours and or agree to sign up to be one of the referrals to receive the reimbursement. I guess I need to call it more of a stipend, but at least it's better than free. And currently, I think a lot of providers we're doing our best with balancing overhead and also trying to continue to see our clients who have lost coverage, but clearly are still in crisis. Mm-hmm. So that is and then psychiatric care access is even worse. So anyway, I know that was a really long spiel, but I guess I was hoping that, and I don't even know if this is within the purview of the conversation today, but I guess I would like for our licensing board to I guess I just wanted to know if there was anything that we had in place that was addressing this crisis.
Thank you for bringing that comment. Thank you for coming and being here. And what I can say is that many of the issues that you're raising, and certainly the access to care, questions of insurance coverage, questions of providers practicing in rural areas or other disadvantaged communities, those are things that our boards and the council do not have any purview over. But very much our board members have clearly expressed the desire that even if there are problems that we don't have the ability to fix, that we should certainly not be contributing to. And so part of the rule review process, part of what we're doing today, is certainly focused on considering, are there any requirements or administrative hurdles or things that are making the licensing process more difficult for folks to become licensed and to be able to be out there and be providers. And where we can identify those, that is the only tool we have, but it is one that we're willing to use to try to make it to try to be faster and be better and more streamlined at getting these providers their license to be able to get out there and serve the folks of Texas.
So if I may, some of the examples that the board has done in recent years is the supervisory experience requirements used to have to be done for at least 24 months, but no longer than 48 months to get the 3,000 hours. They removed that upper maximum. It just has to be at least 24 months. And if it takes you 50 months or 60 months or whatever it takes you to get it, then that's how you got your 3,000 hours. Also, there used to be that you had to apply for the clinical license no more than 5 years after beginning your supervised experience, and that shelf life
Mhm.
expiration has been removed from the rules.
Oh, okay, that's
So the
helpful.
board has looked at things like that to try to still protect the public, but
Mhm.
ease the process as much as they can. And as Mr. Romig said, we're still looking and contemplating other ways that we might be able to ease that application process.
That would be great. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for being here. Now let me recognize Ms. Felderhoff. If you would unmute yourself and introduce yourself and provide your comment.
Hi, thank you. I'm Dr. Brandy Felderhoff. I'm faculty at Texas Women's University. I'm a clinical supervisor, and I'm also currently president of the board for NASW Texas. I appreciate you all inviting us to participate in this process and give public comment. I wanted to ask a follow-up question to actually the rules you were sharing that Angie asked a clarifying question about. I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So an LMSW who is working under a clinician in a private practice, that private practice can be considered the agency setting, and they can work there under contract indefinitely without ever having a formal clinical supervision plan working toward their LCSW. Is that right?
That is my understanding. Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Always good to clarify. Miss Ranieri, if you would unmute yourself and introduce yourself, love to hear your comment.
Hi, my name is Leslie Ranieri. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I've been an LCSW since 1999 and LCSWS since 2013. And I thank you so much to the board for all the work that you do for our profession and the continuation of like care for mental health and social work for Texans. I wanted to express just again, like our concern for like mental health services in Texas, as well as social work profession and portability. With the social work compact, I think that creating additional barriers like to LCSW provision of services in Texas could be negative overall for Texans in the future because we will lose some Texas clinical social workers because of if there are additional requirements or that not consideration of some of those things. I was especially a little bit concerned on the last conversation about like changing the 10% requirement for the hours for the 3,000 hours that was mentioned from so that was a concern because that would make it much longer a process for people to attain their LCSW qualified supervised hours, which would I think create like overall increase the mental health shortage of care. I also wanted to suggest that it might be helpful to social work providers and employers for the board to consider creating a standardized letter when the letter is required, because I think there's a lot of confusion amongst workplaces about what should be included in the letter, even though I think that the rules are pretty clear. But I think there are a lot of questions coming up amongst different workplace settings about what should be in this letter. So I think it would be helpful for that to be considered. And then again, I just want to just encourage, you all for what you do to increase our professionalism and the regulations and all of the things that you do. Thank you so much. And thank you for the work that you're doing for this regulatory review.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Just to follow up, make sure I'm understanding correctly, when you are referencing a standardized letter from agencies, which letter are you referring to?
So the letter that's required from an agency to recognize that they understand that their social worker is under clinical supervision. The regulations, they only state that the employer is recognizing that the social worker is under supervision and that the privacy requirements and things like that. But I think there's a lot of confusion about what that letter should include. So I think that it might be helpful to consider, just like we have other standardized forms, that it might be helpful to consider a form like in that sense that an employer or a social worker who's looking at social work supervision could do so that they have that, you know, when they submit their overall application.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. And before I recognize the next speaker, I did want to mention the issue of the compact came up, and just for everyone's understanding and edification, for Texas to join the social work compact would require a legislation be passed by the Texas legislature. Every state to join the compact must enact the same statutory language to join the compact. And so what would be required is that a member of the legislature file a bill to join the compact, and for that to go through the legislative process. As you can see here on the screen, the compact itself has a website with helpful information, swcompact.org. And certainly, if any of you have interest in promoting that it be adopted, that is a discussion that you very much should have with your member of the legislature. Unfortunately, and fortunately in some ways, but the rules are that as a state agency, we are not allowed to lobby on behalf of legislation. And so we are certainly going to provide resources to the legislature if they have questions about the compact. But if you want to advocate that it should be adopted, I certainly recommend that you reach out to your representative. You may find that by going to that Who Represents Me website if you don't know who your representative is already. So as everyone on here is active and engaged and coming to our town hall, I bet you are the type of folks that already know who your representative is. So now let me recognize Pam Grace. If you would unmute yourself and share your comments.
Yes, hi, thanks so much. Pam Grace, licensed clinical social work supervisor. And I really appreciate the transparency and the access and these sorts of opportunities and your availability. I have a question about LMSWs and others who aren't clinically licensed providing clinical services. And you've talked through that really clearly. But I read somewhere, and I can't remember where I saw it, that the supervisor has to be physically on site when an individual is providing clinical services if they're not clinically licensed. And I wanted to clarify that because it's come up for me with licensees or supervisees around them doing virtual clinical work and how that would work with me not being there. And then I have an office that has one office. And so I haven't done that with people because I don't have a way to be there while they're doing therapy with clients.
Thank you for that question. Yeah.
It's been in rules for some time that the social work board allows for remote supervision, remote supervisory sessions. I've pulled up 781.404. I think it's B as in boy, and then 8 or 9 D as in dog. It's on a second page on the Secretary of State's website. So it allows for supervision by, for example, video web-based things, as long as the security is there to protect the client confidentiality. So as in most rules, we don't want to be too specific about what you can or can't use because we don't want to stifle innovation, but we want to keep the protections in place. So I can't describe much more to you other than what the rule has, with some historical knowledge about the board's concern in past complaint cases about the security of the system that's being used. I can relay from a marriage and family therapy case where an associate, unlike social work, an apprentice associate marriage and family therapist may open their own practice, and the supervisor described that she had access to the associate's client records and online digital records and things like that. So that's how the supervisor was aware of what was happening with record keeping, what was happening with scheduling, what was happening with her workload versus her self-care, things like that. So I hope that's a bit helpful, but it is allowed in rules for remote supervision as long as the client is protected and as long as the supervisor feels that it's an appropriate use of the technology.
Okay, wonderful, thanks. I must have misunderstood that. I appreciate that clarification.
Well, thank you for asking the question, and it is one that I think everyone benefits from hearing.
In case it's useful, let me go back. The social work board has, if I'm back on I think I'm back sharing. Yes, I'm back on the Behavioral Health Executive Council's homepage, and I click on the Masthead Texas State Board of Social Worker Examiners to get to the quick links that are specific to the social work board. And on the forms and publications quick link, if you click on that and it'll jump to that page, down at the bottom are publications or policies and guidelines. And the board has published a guideline for using social media and a guideline for electronic practice. So these are, unlike rules, they're not enforceable. Rules are meant to be the minimum standard, and these guidelines are perhaps best practices or a step up from the minimum, but they might be helpful to review and to look at.
Right. Are there other questions either about the rules that we have identified through the rule process, or any of the proposed rules we've set out already, or just we are here and we are available, and so if you have other questions related to the practice of social work, we'd love to answer those. I'm afraid we can't answer specific disciplinary complaint questions or specific application questions, but we will do our best for everything else. Ms. Romo, if you would unmute and welcome to the conversation.
Hello, thank you. I did not come prepared to ask this question, so I'm kind of spitballing here. So I'm sorry if it's not very eloquent, but I recently became a clinical supervisor. I've been a LCSW since 2017, and I, after consulting with the rules and everything, one of the supervisees that I'm about to take on is interested in pursuing independent practice recognition rather than clinical, because of their job description and stuff. So I just wanted to verify if there's anything in the rules. I haven't found anything in regards to having like a group where there's a mix of folks pursuing clinical work, clinical recognition, and other folks in the group pursuing the IPR recognition. So if that's allowed to have kind of like a mix.
So that's a little different. I will, just for clarification, please know that the independent practice recognition is only for non-clinical services. So if your supervisee gains the independent practice recognition, they may open their own practice, but only for non-clinical services. So having a group of supervisees, some of which are pursuing clinical qualifications, and at least one that's pursuing non-clinical qualification, I'm not sure that they would benefit from being in the group together.
Hmm.
And I would stress that it must be very clear what services are clinical and what services are non-clinical, just so the supervisee who's pursuing independent practice doesn't develop a sense that they are then allowed to do the clinical services such as assess, diagnose, and treat for mental health disorders in an independent setting. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, definitely in regards to, understanding what the independent practice recognition actually entails and it's allowed under. Um, so you would recommend to have not not a mixed group, a group of those seeking clinical recognition, and then maybe doing independent, I'm sorry, not independent, but just
Individual.
one-on-one individual, thank you, individual supervision for
And,
the
and I would recommend that you consult with a more experienced supervisor who has maybe encountered both supervision types to help guide you. I'm not a
Mhm.
practitioner or a supervisor. I'm just informed by my history with the board.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
to as you were discussing, I think the point Sarah makes is not all topics and supervision are always going to be overlapping, but certainly it is. I don't want to dissuade you from, on an occasion, having them in a group together if
Mhm.
what you were discussing and what you are working on is something that would benefit all of them. That is
Okay.
certainly not against the rules to have that group setting. I think what we're suggesting is doing doing all of their supervision in a group setting for both groups would probably not be appropriate in all cases.
Okay, understood. Yeah, so maybe like depending on the topic being discussed in a particular session, considering having them present, or just doing again, I cannot think of the word, not independent, individual supervision. Thank you.
Exactly. Yes,
Thank you.
and certainly strongly recommend, as always, that you work and rely on colleagues to brainstorm with you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a hand up from someone just identified as MJ. So if you would unmute and join the conversation.
Hi, my name's Melissa Robinson. I'm an LMSW.
I'm sorry, MJ. Hold on for just a moment. You're very, very faint. If there is a way you could get closer to a microphone.
Okay, does this help?
A little. You're still very faint.
Okay, I'm not sure. I'm on my laptop, so
That's okay. We'll just be very quiet, and
ah,
hopefully I'll be able to hear you.
okay. My name's Melissa Robinson. I'm an LMSW IPR supervisor, and I can speak to the challenge with the supervision between clinical and not clinical. I do have my own practice, non-clinical services. However, the supervision course is all about clinical services. So it was helpful in terms of business sense, but not much guidance was given for non-clinical. Which then I think leads to confusion with people practicing independently, billing, etc. So maybe that's something that could be at least considered for the course. I've even contacted LCSWs who tell me they've never done supervision for IPR. So I know it's not very common.
Gotcha. Thank you. That's very helpful following on the last speaker. And an excellent thought for us to consider. All right. We are approaching the noon hour. And so at this point, I will say we are scheduled for another hour, and we as staff have plenty of time and are in no rush to leave. And so happy to answer questions. If you are attending online, certainly do not feel like you are beholden to stay the entire time. We welcome you to stay as long as you want, but no hard feelings if you need to jump off at any point to grab some lunch or attend another meeting or whatever you may have. So, but we are still here and happy to answer any other questions that y'all are grappling with. And while folks are thinking, I will reiterate that the public comment form will be open through September 1st, and certainly welcome any comments that y'all have. All of the feedback that we gather and the findings that we develop through this process will be presented to the boards at their September meeting, and then at the council level at their October 15th meeting. At that time, that's when the council will sort of wrap up the rule review process, but that will then just start the process of proposing any repealed rules or rule changes. And again, we'll go through the normal rulemaking from there. All right. Well, and again, oh, excellent. Ms. Lutz.
Sorry, I don't want to hog all the time, but since you have another hour, right?
Absolutely. That's why we're here.
So going back to the proposed rules that were published today on LMSW's practicing clinically, I'm wondering if you can speak to, I think social workers are awesome, and hopefully the board thinks they are too. But I'm wondering if you can speak to the reasoning that mid-level clinicians with social work can practice clinically without a formal clinical supervision plan, when that is different for the other licensing boards, LPC associates and LNFT associates, who my understanding is they have to be under a formal clinical supervision plan working toward licensure. I might be understanding that incorrectly.
So if I may,
Yeah.
if I understand your question correctly, for example, a master social worker can provide clinical services in an agency setting without being under a clinical supervision plan, but being supervised by a psychologist or a psychiatrist or
Correct.
an LPC. For a marriage and family therapist associate, which is an apprentice type license, they may only practice under the supervision of a licensed marriage and family therapist with supervisor. It is not the associate license is not there's no other path except to be a fully licensed LMFT. Unlike a master social worker who could remain a master social worker for their whole career. Same with the LPC associate, it's an apprentice type license. And it is meant to be a stepping stone to being an independent LPC licensed professional counselor, rather than a career path by itself. Does that help address the question?
It does. And certainly I know that there are many LMSWs out there who are fabulous. I know many of them. I love them. Also, I think it might open this up for LMSWs being supervised by professionals who are not social workers, and opening up that risk of, are they being given the direction that they need to follow social work rules?
And
So
I
the-
believe that's why to accrue hours to qualify for the clinical license, the licensed master social worker must be supervised by a licensed clinical social worker with the supervisor status, so that they are getting that specific professional training for clinical social work before they attempt the clinical exam and before they apply for social work for clinical licensure.
Yes, so if they're working toward independent licensure, they're going to get that direction from a LCSW supervisor. If they are not seeking independent licensure, they may be given incorrect direction from other licensed professionals who are not familiar with social work board rules.
Certainly, we hope not.
I hope not as well.
And I think to that point, where the rules are making an assumption is the nature of the employment. To that same point, that if you are under a clinical supervision plan, you are working toward being yourself an independent practitioner, and thus need that, are expected to be doing some higher level work on your own, and the supervision should be accounting for that as the end goal, versus an LMSW who is may be doing clinical work, but in a relationship where the expectation is never that they will be someday being independent, and therefore the supervision they are receiving should account for that, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I don't want to steal all of the time. So if you have other hands raised, by all means, I will be quiet.
We do not yet, and so certainly continue again.
Okay.
Oh, no, I spoke too soon. We do have one raised. So
Okay, I'm gonna sit back.
But then feel free to raise your hand again.
Okay.
Melissa, oh, we just lost you.
There you go.
There you go. Melissa, if you'd unmute.
Okay, so this is MJ. Is the audio better?
Yes, much better.
Okay, I changed devices here. So I just spoke on the IPR issue. I just wanted to address Angie's comment and a couple of other LCSWs, and maybe offer something that would help you understand, I guess, what our confusion is. We're in different social work groups on Facebook. There's ads for, hey, we need PRN social workers. It might be for home health. It might be for private practice. It might be for adoption home studies, etc. So there's confusion with the term PRN. And I always try to explain, and I get so many comments back, but basically it's the way you're paid is the way I understand, and how the practice is set up. If you are employed and receive a check with taxes taken out, you are an employee, which means you can practice clinical or non-clinical because that is the setting. If it's MHMR and you're employed part-time or even as a PRN, an LMSW can provide clinical services because perhaps the supervisor is an LCSW or psychologist, etc. Like that is what I understand is okay. However, if you're practicing independently as an LMSW, not under clinical supervision, then you are practicing independently without a license, whether that's court work, adoption home studies, home health, clinical or not, you're practicing independently because typically you're paid by the work or the contract, and you're not an employee. So is that how you understand the difference between independent practice versus being an employee?
So I can speak to historical conversations the board has had with different cases. And what the board generally tried to suss out from the facts of the case was whether or not the agency that was paying the master social worker's contract or paying their salary had some oversight to know the well-being of the client, and had responsibility for the well-being of the client, and that there was some mental health professional that had supervisory oversight of the master social worker's work. Indeed, you are absolutely correct. If I only have LMSW behind my name, then I cannot practice anything independent. I must have the independent practice recognition, specialty recognition, or I must be under a formal supervision plan for independent practice recognition in order to do any non-clinical independent practice. So that's how I've heard the board members discuss it. So it wasn't so much a discussion about, am I PRN? Am I under contract? Am I under a salary negotiation? But more about who has actual responsibility for the well-being of the client and what oversight did the master social worker have of their work, whether clinical or non-clinical, depending on the services provided. Does that help clarify?
Okay, that is, yes, thank you very much. That is how I also understand and have been having discussions with others. And what I've seen happening is, let's say a marketing person or even someone with an MBA is a headhunter or something in social work groups, and they're saying they need PRN workers or they need someone to do X type of work, home health, hospice, things where they would be independently practicing, going to a client's home, for example, doing an assessment, writing up a needs plan, and then delivering services. And what happens is, because that person is not educated in social work rules and practice, code of conduct, ethics, et cetera, they're not asking or requiring or putting in the ad that you must be licensed independently. Now, we know that's not their job, but so many social workers either are not aware of that or will say, well, they didn't ask me. Although the onus is on us to know our rules, but so many don't, and then step into that. And that is where I see the concern of the LCSWs, and just liability. But I've been met with a lot of resistance when I have this discussion. So maybe just putting some information, out there to help explain why there's so much confusion, because people that are hiring are not asking or requiring, that independent license.
And I can relay historically the cases that I've seen. It oftentimes was the agency hired someone to do the work without the specialty recognition. And, um, and you're absolutely right. The burden was all on the licensee to know what the rules were. The board doesn't have the jurisdictional reach to go after the agency. They have jurisdiction over the licensee, and it's the responsibility of the licensee to understand the scope of the practice that their license gives them. But thank you for bringing that up. A very good point.
Miss, excuse me, Miss Lutz again, and then Miss Grace again. After
Thank
that.
you. I wanted to just piggyback on that. I think one of the bits of confusion with our social work rules is that independent practice is used as both a noun and a verb, and can get a bit confusing with, I think I've read LPC associates can have an independent practice as long as they are not practicing independently. And so your description does help clarify, which brings up one more question that I have. And I appreciate this time. I know this is not what the meeting was for. But if an LMSW is contracting with different agencies who are over a client, who have responsibility for the client, that LMSW can then form a PLLC business providing clinical, as long as they're not contracting with, say, an EAP or insurance, and they are only contracting with other groups, because this is something that groups are now encouraging LMSWs to get their PLLC to protect them from the IRS, right? Because an independent contractor and all of what that means, LMSWs cannot practice independently. And so group practices are saying, to be a 1099, we are responsible for the client, but you need a PLLC, right, to protect them. And so that's something that's happening. We're seeing it, and a lot of social work supervisors are like, oh, hold on, that sounds like an independent practice if you have a PLLC.
Well, and that's, let me sort of high level reiterate that as the jurisdiction of the council is over licensees, but it is their professional license to practice. It is not everything about their business operations, right? And so we our rules do not dictate what sort of LLC or PLLC or private corporation, or what sort of entity licensees are or are not allowed to create. And instead, what we are looking for in our decision making is the underlying meaningful relationship that the licensee is having with the agency they are working for. And so that's why it says you may be employed or under contract with the agency. We are not saying, we are not prohibiting independent contractor relationships in a business sense. But instead, regardless of what the relationship is called and whether or not there is or is not a private corporation or liability exchange or tax implications, anything like that, does the agency and the appropriate licensed supervisor have both the responsibility for care of the client and meaningful oversight and direction of the LMSW? That those are the questions that we are asking, and so hopefully for everybody who's still attending and listening, that makes it a little more clear that there's not a one size fits all. There's not going to be a gotcha moment. You formed an LLC and that means you've broken a rule. More it's the meaningful, what does your relationship to the agency and the employment setting look like?
Perfect. That does offer a lot of clarification. So with
If I
public,
could, sorry, if I could just expand on that, because so there's a pretty clear rule in 781.402. An LMSW who plans to apply for the LCSW may not open an independent social work practice to provide clinical services. And then in 781.302, the rule as it stands now, although it is proposed for change, but as it stands now in subsection H, is that an LMSW who is not recognized for independent practice may not provide social work services from a location that the LMSW owns or leases. So I'm not sure how they can open a practice to gather contracts to provide clinical services under their own shingle.
I agree with you, but that item is
But that's happening.
that item, yes, well, and that item is being taken out. So that the wording in that item that's being taken out is someone else has responsibility for the client and the whole shingle idea, right? So something to consider. The comments on this 781.302, I know this isn't what this meeting was for, but do those also need to be submitted written, or will the comments from this meeting be considered for that?
It would be helpful if you could do the written comment. And I'm trying to think, the social work board will review public comments at their meeting on September 13th. You could also provide verbal comment then at the September 13th meeting if you'd like.
Perfect, thank you. I'll be quiet now. I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much for attending. Pam Grace.
Yes, this has been terrific. I'm learning a lot. I have a thought about, here's what I would wish and would love if it existed. When we renew, we're required to watch a video series that goes through each of the levels of licensure and breaks down the social work task that you can do with that license. Like counsel, if you're LMSW, you can do research, you can do interviewing, case management, advocacy, like even if it needs to be more specific, but like for each one, these are the tasks, because often people, I'm working with one person who thought she could just advertise herself as a coach and doing CBT with an LMSW. But this goes back to she's creating her own business and she can't do that. But I think there's, just like we're talking here, and when I started my career, I got dinged because my clinical supervisor hired me to work in her agency and said, we were in the Washington, D.C. area. It didn't matter which state I had a license for, Maryland, D.C., or Virginia. I just needed to have some license. And so I didn't realize it. And then 2 years later, when I applied for a clinical licensure in that other state, I got dinged. Yeah, any visual aid and all the different ways that we learn that could clarify this, breaking it down by licensure level.
Thank you. That's a very interesting idea.
I just want to say thank you to everyone who's provided comment, whether you think it's on topic or off. All of it is helpful. All of it is helpful and informative as we consider the language of the rules, and whether it's for the quadrennial review or for upcoming proposed rules or that kind of thing. I'm very grateful for your comments and for your insights and your sharing today.
Amber. You want to unmute?
Hi, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I'm actually on vacation at the beach, but I wanted to join this meeting. So sorry if you guys hear water in the background. Um, so I did have a question about because I'm a clinical supervisor, and one thing that I know I have had questions about and other supervisors is the 4 hours that the LMSW need. And if they don't get the 4 hours that month, can they count the month? Um, it's like been like a back and forth thing that I know like other supervisors been having. And sometimes supervisors can't always get it just due to maybe vacation, getting sick and those things. Um, and then some supervisees, if they have other friends that are supervisees, their supervisors tell them that they can make it up in a way of like doing like a paper or something to kind of make up like that hour or 2 hours. So I guess my question is like, because in the rule book, it's like you got to have those 4 hours a month. If they don't have 4 hours, say they get 3, but they're missing an hour for some reason, like they got sick and they couldn't come, can we still count that month, or technically are we not supposed to count it and then we have to add that month? They can't count that month and we just have to add another month on to their supervision time, and then they have to figure out a way to make up that other hour. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yes.
Sorry.
That makes sense. Let me say a couple of things and then hopefully Sarah will correct me if I say anything wrong. So first on the question of can you do a book report or something instead of supervision? No, that there's not those 4 hours need to be supervision. That's so yes, not allowed to do something else besides supervision and call it supervision. We do not we are not tracking these hours on a first of the month to the last of the month strict. You didn't get 4 hours in July proper, therefore all of July doesn't count. We're not tracking it at that level of granularity because things do change. Schedules happen, things move around. But over the course of a month of the supervisee doing work, there needs to be 4 hours of supervision, and that should be a fairly constant thing. And where it will come back to hurt your supervisees is if there is a large gap in more than a month between your supervision hours, then at the end, when we are looking at how many supervision hours they have versus the total time it took them to get all of their experience hours, they will not have a sufficient number of supervision hours for all of the months that they worked. And so it is very important that you as supervisors make sure, again, generally, as we're saying, in a 30-day period, doesn't have to be from the 1st to the 31st, but is that you are getting these 4 hours consistently over the month's time. Hopefully that was clear, but not too.
That made sense, Robert. And thank you for explaining that, because I'm just gonna say, like, I have a supervisor this month that she was able to get we did 2 groups this month because like it was like summertime. I'm sorry, for July. It was like usually in the summer times we just do 2 groups because everyone's on vacation. So the issue is she has 2 hours for this month, and I just did the reason that she missed the other 2 hours because of emergency medical issue that came up. So I was like, I don't want to not count the month for her, but I just didn't know if that was okay or not, or just figure out a way. So I guess that's just like my dilemma, that I'm just trying to figure out what's the best way to move forward with her when we meet next week.
And to back up, to give more perspective, the reason for the supervisory sessions is not to just tick off hours for the supervisee. It's to protect the client. It's to make sure that the supervisor is aware what the supervisee is doing in their direct client contact. So if there's an extended gap of supervisory sessions, I'll just ask, what protection is being provided to the client for that care that's being provided by someone who is learning and having professional growth? So that I'll leave that as the judgment for the supervisor to make. Some supervisees might be able to operate, given their caseload and their particular clients, week over week without too much oversight, whereas another supervisee or might need more hand-holding, or might have a client who is a little more difficult and might need more and frequent guidance. So the rule is there to try to give, again, a minimum standard for public protection, but also allow flexibility for the realities of life of a social worker. So I hope that helps you when you're trying to make your judgment about what to count and what not to count.
And very much, please communicate to your fellow supervisors that we do not want supervisees to face some arbitrary loss of their supervised experience that just disqualifies a month because you got 3 hours instead of 4. But rather, what we want to see is good faith and good faith on the part of the supervisee to be supervised while they are gaining that experience, and good faith on the supervisors to provide that regular oversight and not sporadic. So, but yeah, thank you for very much for bringing up this topic. Yadira Munoz.
Hi, thank you. You all can hear me, correct?
Yes.
You're there?
Okay. So I am an LMSW, and I know I'm at the website for the Behavioral Health Executive Council. I've been a social worker, I think, for 10 years or more. And I know the board that governed us was a mess before this took over. On the comments about the independent, I think is it IPR, independent practice recognition. I think I do remember the website back then did give clear information to every type of license, right? The IPR and like all the different adjectives or whatever it's called. I don't see that right now in the website, unless you go into its statutes and rules. Before, on the previous website, it was under applying for a license and applying for a license basically, but I don't see the IPR information on that page. So I was wondering if that's something that's being worked on, or am I overlooking something? I mean, I did a Google search, and the only place where it comes up is socialworkguide.org, but I was, definitely trying to find more from the source, the actual source. I'm very, into looking at the official one.
I think you're correct. I think it is not on our current Behavioral Health Executive Council website. It is in the scope of practice is in the most clear is in 781.302 of the rules. So that's something we can look into, whether we want to reiterate the rules on a web page. So we'll make note of that. Thank you.
And just to make sure we're understanding you correctly, you're interested in that guidance document being about the types of practice and the scope of practice for each type of licensure, or were you asking about a more clear how to apply for each license type?
Am I, okay, yeah, I'm still on, sorry. Yeah, for both, I mean, like I said, there was a how-to before. So when all of this changed, I haven't really gone back, but I thought I could easily find it, today. Just because again, everyone's kind of clarifying that information, which I'm learning a lot on. And so I do know several people that are in the same situation of, being either PRN or, or whatnot, where they don't know about this. And like I said, before the website before I remember did have it. So yeah, just a clarification. I think it would make sense. I think you have to have a lot of time to go into the statutes and rules. But yeah, so anyway, yeah.
Thank
Thanks.
you very much for bringing that up. All right. Well, we're now hitting on 12:30, been about an hour and a half, and this has been a very productive conversation. I really appreciate everybody's feedback. I don't want to artificially hold us here longer. So certainly, I guess I'll start making the sort of last call for questions or comments. Melissa, MJ.
Hello, yes, it's Melissa again. Just a quick question to confirm, does the social work board, I know they don't have jurisdiction over people who are not licensed, but is there an entity who does? So for example, someone who represents themselves as a social worker, whether they've ever been licensed or not, or their license is expired, or they're not allowed to practice for disciplinary reasons, etc. Does the board accept?
Yes, so
Okay. Huh?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but yes, if someone is practicing without a license, we do try to seek to stop that, and so we will engage with that person and ask them to cease their operations. If we cannot get them to comply, then the entity in the state that has the authority to actually force them to stop practicing or to fine them for that is the Attorney General's office. And so we will refer those cases to the Attorney General's office if they will not stop.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Monica Romo.
Hi. Hi again. Thank you.
Yes.
So in regards again to clinical supervision, if after reviewing a job description for a potential supervisee, the job description does not like fully describe their actual work duties, which do involve clinical tasks such as assessment, supportive counseling, brief interventions, SFBT, MI, and all of those things. Is it acceptable to provide kind of like an addendum to a job description that actually describes those clinical skills that are being practiced in the job, in the case that it's not possible to provide an update? Like this person works for an agency that is not willing to update the official job description, but is willing to provide like a letter stating that these are duties that this person is completing. Would that be acceptable?
If I understand correctly, the addendum also comes from the employer.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yes.
it's not you and the supervisee writing down, this is what she was really doing. It's an
Yeah,
official document from the employer.
it would be an official document from the employer. It's just, it's not possible to update the actual job description, but the employer is willing to provide like a letter on official letterhead stating the actual duties that
If
are clinical.
If I were staff looking at that, I would, and I can clearly see that it's from the employer, from a third party verification, I would accept it.
Thank you.
That's a good question. Thank you.
Destiny B. Welcome.
Hi, yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. So yes, I'm Destiny. I am a licensed clinical social worker. I am kind of piggybacking off of what was just brought up. I believe it was mentioned like brief interventions as like being described as clinical practice. I just wanted to clarify that. So is brief intervention, let's say crisis intervention, suicide assessment risk, using other forms of diagnostic, maybe screeners assessing, so like PHQ-9s, Columbia screenings, is that considered to fall under the clinical social work practice? I know that the actual code describes other diagnostic criteria and uses wording as like may not be limited to, you know, individual psychotherapy, etc. So I just wanted to get clarity on that, please.
So I'm thinking of two different things. I'm thinking of the definition and rules of clinical practice. And I'm thinking of, I often get questions about whether the master social worker's job duty actually covers enough clinical practice in order to prepare them for independent practice. So I've pulled up the definition here, and so if any of the, certainly an assessment is clinical social work. If it's part of assess, diagnose, and treat as listed in the definition. But if that's all that the MSW is doing, for example, if they're on a crisis hotline, there's not perhaps a lot of opportunity to treat a person. And I've heard the board members discuss in the past that they would prefer the master social worker who is preparing to become an independent clinical social worker have the experience to assess, diagnose, and treat, and see that whole arch of services for a particular client, as they would if they had their own independent private practice. So I'm not sure if I'm getting to the heart of your question. So come back with what I misunderstood about your question or what more you might need to know.
No, thank you. So what I heard from that is that it sounds like the board is preferring those LMSWs who are pursuing the LCSW status to they're preferring that person to be in an individual, maybe private practice type setting, if that's what they're pursuing long term. But if that's what they're preferring, is that a requirement? Because preference is different than requirements, if that makes sense.
And I think what the rule is trying to allow is that there are settings in which the master social worker, for example, might be in a hospital, might be part of a treatment team, and the master social worker might be assigned the assessment part, but not actually be hands-on for the treatment part. I would have to leave it up to the individual supervisor to know the total scope of that master social worker's experience. And if they've never had the experience to assess, diagnose, and treat, I know that some master social workers hired in a private practice or a nonprofit where they could get that overarching services. Unfortunately, I can't slice and dice. I can't speak for the board or what the board would accept in and without having the actual documentation for that particular person. That's
That's
frustrating, I'm
understandable.
sure, to hear.
No, I appreciate that. And I suppose my suggestion to present to the board would be making that a bit more clear. There's a lot of ambiguity in clinical practice and what they would like. And if that's the preference, I think then that should be written to just help the profession as a whole. And also clarifying perhaps, I know of some LMSWs, for instance, in psychiatric hospital inpatient settings. So while it's brief, perhaps maybe like a 3 to 5 length of stay, would something like that count as well? So just clarity on that. That would be my suggestion to the board.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Good perspective.
Absolutely. And again, as an overarching point, you know, our intention, the intention of the rules is not to be inflexible and not to be catching people. Well, you didn't quite get this exact thing, so it doesn't count. Rather, it's the intention of the rules and how we are trying to approach it as an agency is looking at that meaningfulness. That did, you know, whether something is clinical practice or not is really looking at the meaningful nature of the work the person is doing, and the supervision that they're getting, et cetera. So that is our goal. And certainly that is also, as Sarah has mentioned, the difference between, we do have to set minimum standards, but we also try to provide guidelines for what that goal is meant to reach. All right. Well,
I would add, I just brought up the clinical verification form. And just for the supervisor would be filling out this form and attesting to the start date, the end date, the number of months, all of the logistical, statistical data. But then there's also the part where the supervisor recommends or notes that they have reservations about a particular applicant. Sorry, that just made me dizzy to try to make it bigger. So if you have any reservations about, yes, they've accumulated all the hours, but you had a reservation about their particular experience in being able to provide a full treatment plan or that kind of thing, then there's a place to note it there. What I just want to step back from the minutia of the rules and reiterate the basic concept of what the supervisor is trying to do is impart professional development to that master social worker so that when they are practicing independently, they have all of the tools in their tool belt to be able to do that. That's the end goal in all of the numbers and the hours that we're asking you to track. I hope that's a helpful perspective.
all right. Well, I gave last call once, but I'll do it one more time. We're really appreciative of all the time y'all have shared with us and coming and listening, but also asking your questions and raising these topics. I know the board will be glad to hear about this engagement and get this feedback. So one last chance, if there's any lingering questions, and otherwise we will close the town hall in just a moment. One more. Ms. Ranieri.
I just again wanted to thank you guys for having this and, all of the, feedback and everything and for all the things that you do. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Welcome.
Thank you. Right. Well, with that, I will again conclude and say thanks again for your attendance and coming here. As we mentioned, the online public comment form will be up there on our website and open until September 1st. We certainly, if you go home tonight and think, oh gosh, I had a thought and I forgot to share it, you are very welcome to reach out and contact us and send in your feedback. As always, if you have questions or concerns or thoughts, you are very much welcome to reach out to us on our website, bhec.texas.gov. There is a contact us form where you can reach out on questions about the practice of social work or rules or any other topics. And so thank you all again for joining us. Reach out, stay engaged, and we will hope to see all of your names or in person at our next board meeting. So thank you all.